Every empire believes it's different. Rome thought their military was unstoppable. Spain believed their gold would last forever. Britain assumed the sun would never set on their flag. And right now, the United States sits at stage 5 of the exact same pattern. The question isn't if collapse happens. The question is, do you recognize the signs before it's too late? Tell me where you're watching from in the comments. I want to see how many people are seeing this pattern unfold in real time. Let's rewind to 146 BC. Rome just destroyed Carthage. They're the undisputed superpower. Their currency, the denarius, is accepted everywhere from Britain to Egypt. Sound familiar? But here's what nobody tells you about that moment. Rome's collapse didn't start with barbarians at the gate. It started with a financial decision that seemed smart at the time. The Roman Senate faced a problem. They had conquered so much territory that maintaining their military was becoming impossibly expensive. So they made a choice. They started clipping their coins. They reduced the silver content in the denarius from 95% to 85%, then 70%, then 50%. By the time Emperor Diocletian took power in 284 AD, the denarius had only 5% silver. They printed money to solve their problems. Does this sound familiar yet? But let me take you even further back. Let me show you where this pattern actually begins. Stage 1. The rise through innovation. Every empire starts here. Rome built roads and aqueducts that connected an entire continent. Spain pioneered global naval routes that nobody thought possible. Britain created the first true global financial system, with the pound sterling as the world's reserve currency. And the United States? They built the internet, landed on the moon, and created the dollar system that still runs the world today. This is the innovation phase. New technology, new trade routes, new ways of organizing society. The empire that innovates first gets a 50 to 100-year head start on everyone else. Rome had their roads. Spain had their ships. Britain had their factories. America had Silicon Valley. But here's the trap. Success breeds complacency. And complacency breeds the next stage. Stage 2. Financial dominance and currency control. This is where empires stop producing and start extracting. Rome stopped building roads and started taxing provinces. Spain stopped exploring and started shipping gold from the Americas. Britain stopped inventing and started banking for the world. America stopped manufacturing and started financializing everything. Listen to this number. In 1950, manufacturing was 28% of US GDP. Today, less than 11%. But financial services went from 2% to over 20%. That's not evolution. That's the exact same transition Rome made when they turned from builders to bankers. And here's what happens in stage 2. Your currency becomes the reserve currency. Everyone wants it. Everyone needs it. The Roman denarius was required for trade across the Mediterranean. The Spanish real became the global currency in the 1500s. The pound sterling dominated the 1800s. And since 1944, the world runs on dollars. But this creates a dangerous illusion. When everyone wants your currency, you can print more of it without immediate consequences. You can run deficits that would destroy any other nation. You can fight wars on credit. You can consume more than you produce. Spain learned this the hard way. Let me tell you about the price revolution. Between 1500 and 1650, Spain brought back so much gold and silver from the Americas that they thought they'd solved economics forever. King Philip II of Spain controlled more wealth than any human in history up to that point. The Spanish treasury was overflowing. They were the superpower. But something strange happened. Prices in Spain started rising. Bread that cost 1 real in 1500 cost 4 reals by 1600. The Spanish called it abundance that makes us poor. They had all the gold, but somehow they were getting poorer. Here's why. They stopped making things. Why work in a hot Spanish forge when you can buy cheaper goods from France or the Netherlands? Spanish manufacturing collapsed. They imported everything. The gold flowed right back out to pay for foreign goods. By 1557, Spain declared bankruptcy. By 1596, they declared it again. And again in 1607, 1627, 1647, and 1680. All that gold, all that power, gone in 3 generations. This brings us to stage 3, military overextension. When your currency gives you unlimited credit, you fight unlimited wars. Rome was fighting on 8 different fronts by 200 AD. Spain was battling in the Netherlands, England, France, and the Ottoman Empire simultaneously. Britain was maintaining garrisons on 6 continents, and the United States? We've been at war for 225 out of 249 years of our existence. Here's the cost breakdown. Rome spent 70% of their budget on military by 300 AD. Spain spent 75% of revenues on war by 1600. Britain was spending 50% during the height of empire. The United States spends more on defense than the next 10 countries combined. But it's not just the money, it's the manpower. Rome couldn't recruit enough citizens, so they hired Germanic mercenaries. Spain couldn't crew their ships, so they hired foreign sailors. Britain couldn't staff their colonies, so they created complex systems of local administration. America can't fill enlistment quotas, so we have 750 military bases in 80 countries relying increasingly on contractors. When you pay foreigners to defend your empire, you're already in stage 3. Stage 4, the currency crisis. This is where the math stops working. Rome couldn't pay their mercenaries in real silver, so they mixed in copper. Spain couldn't finance their wars, so they seized gold from private citizens. Britain couldn't maintain the gold standard, so they abandoned it in 1931. In America, we left the gold standard in 1971, August 15th, 1971. President Nixon closes the gold window. For the first time in history, the world's reserve currency is backed by nothing but trust. Just paper. Just promises. At first, it seemed brilliant. The U.S. could print money without constraint. We could run any deficit we wanted. We fought the Cold War on credit. We built the modern economy on credit. Everything worked. But look at the numbers now. U.S. national debt in 1971, $398 billion. U.S. national debt today, $35 trillion. That's an 88-fold increase in 54 years. The dollar has lost 87% of its purchasing power since 1971. You know what's terrifying? Rome's denarius lost 95% of its value between 200 and 300 AD. The Spanish real lost 80% of its value between 1550 and 1650. The pound sterling lost 90% of its value between 1914 and 1980. The pattern is always the same. Currency debasement, inflation, loss of purchasing power. The empire can still project military force. The empire can still intimidate neighbors. But the money is dying, and that brings us to stage 5, where America is right now. Stage 5, the desperate measures phase. This is where empires know they're in trouble, and they start making increasingly desperate decisions. Rome tried price controls under Diocletian. They made a law saying bread must cost exactly this much. Wine must cost exactly that much. Wages were frozen. Anyone who charged more faced execution. Did it work? No, it created black markets. It destroyed what was left of Roman trade. The empire splintered. Spain tried something different. They attempted to ban the export of gold. They made it illegal to take Spanish gold out of Spain. But the merchants found ways. They smuggled it. They melted it down. They moved it through foreign banks. You can't stop economic gravity with laws. Britain tried to hold onto their empire through increasingly complex financial arrangements. They created the sterling area, a zone of countries tied to the pound. They imposed currency controls. They restricted capital movement. It delayed the inevitable by maybe 20 years. But by 1967, the pound was devalued. By 1971, the sterling area collapsed. Now look at America's desperate measures. We're weaponizing the dollar through sanctions. We're restricting capital flows to China. We're fighting currency wars with tariffs and money printing, calling it quantitative easing. But these aren't new ideas. They're the same desperate measures every empire takes in its final stage, just with modern names. Here's the truth. We're living through stage 5 of empire decline. The phase where everyone knows something's wrong, but no one wants to admit it. In Rome, citizens in 250 AD knew their coins were worthless, but they pretended they weren't. In Spain, nobles in 1600 watched their economy rot, but kept up appearances. In Britain, leaders in 1950 called their collapse a Commonwealth transition. And Americans today, we tell ourselves it's different this time. We have technology. We have nuclear weapons. We have the reserve currency. We're exceptional. Every empire thought they were exceptional. Let me show you why that belief always ends the same way. Rome's breaking point came when its military became too expensive to sustain. They started hiring foreign mercenaries, barbarians, to defend their borders. Eventually, those mercenaries realized they didn't need Rome at all. They simply took over. America's modern version of that story isn't soldiers, it's money. When our creditors realize they don't need the US dollar, the same thing happens. China is already settling oil trades in yuan. Saudi Arabia now accepts non-dollar payments. The BRICS nations are building their own systems. They're doing to the dollar what the barbarians did to Rome, making it irrelevant. Spain's breaking point was 1588, the defeat of the Spanish Armada. That moment shattered the illusion of invincibility. The money dried up. The wars became unwinnable. Within 50 years, Spain was a second-rate power. For Britain, it was the Suez Crisis in 1956. They tried to reassert control in Egypt, and the U.S. told them to stand down. Overnight, Britain realized it wasn't the world's superpower anymore. The pound never recovered. So what's America's breaking point? Maybe it already happened. Maybe it was 2008, when we printed $4 trillion to save the banks. Maybe it was 2020, when we printed another $5 trillion for COVID. Or maybe it's happening now, as countries quietly move away from dollar dependence. Or maybe it's coming soon, when the next crisis hits, and printing money doesn't work anymore, when inflation can't be contained, when the bond market rebels, when foreign nations dump treasuries faster than the Fed can buy them. The numbers tell the story. America's debt-to-GDP ratio is 123%. Rome collapsed at 100%. Japan is at 264% and stuck in permanent stagnation. Somewhere between those numbers lies the breaking point. In 2000, 59% of global central bank reserves were held in US dollars. Today, it's less than 47%. That's a 12-point drop in one generation. Empires don't fall overnight. They bleed slowly until suddenly they don't. Here's the part most people ignore. Interest payments on US debt now exceed the entire defense budget. We spend more money paying interest than funding our military. Rome hit that point in 250 AD. 50 years later, it was gone. But collapse doesn't mean extinction. When Rome fell, people didn't vanish. They adapted. When Spain declined, it rebuilt. When Britain's empire ended, its people kept going. Life continued, just under a different system. So what happens when America reaches stage 6, the final stage? First comes a currency crisis. The dollar won't crash overnight. It'll slowly lose its dominance as nations diversify. It'll go from being the global currency to a global currency. Second comes fragmentation. Empires always decentralize. Rome split east and west. Spain fractured into smaller kingdoms. The British Empire turned into the Commonwealth. The United States might follow the same pattern. More regional power, less federal control, and weaker unity. Third, a new power rises. Rome gave way to Byzantium. Spain gave way to Britain. Britain gave way to America. Who's next? Maybe China, maybe a coalition. A multipolar world where power is shared, not dominated. Historically, this transition takes 30 to 50 years. Rome entered stage 5 around 235 AD and fully collapsed by 476. But the real damage happened in the final 50 years. Spain entered stage 5 around 1580, done by 1650. Britain entered stage 5 around 1914, lost reserve currency status by 1950. If America entered stage 5 in 1971, when we left the gold standard, then we're 54 years in. If it began in 2008, we're 17 years in. Either way, the clock is ticking, but patterns aren't destiny, they're warnings. Rome could have reformed its currency. Spain could have built industry. Britain could have transitioned more smoothly. America still could change course. We could rein in spending, rebuild infrastructure, and bring back manufacturing. We could stabilize the dollar instead of weaponizing it. But will we? History says no. Because stage 5 benefits the powerful. The defense industry needs conflict. Banks need money printing. Politicians need deficits to win votes. Rome had the Senate protecting wealth. Spain had nobles avoiding taxes. Britain had London financiers blocking reform. America has Wall Street, Silicon Valley, and the military-industrial complex. The system defends itself until it collapses under its own weight. So remember these 3 lessons from history. 1. Currency debasement is the clearest sign of decline. When empires can't pay their bills with real money, they print fake money. And every time, it ends the same way. 2. Military overreach destroys empires faster than defeat. Rome, Spain, and Britain all won wars they couldn't afford. America spends over $800 billion a year on defense, and even more on the interest from past wars. 3. The reserve currency is a trap. It gives you power, but it makes you soft. You stop producing. You import everything. You rely on your currency instead of your creativity, until one day the world stops needing your money. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. Right now, America rhymes with Rome in 250 AD, Spain in 1600, and Britain in 1920. We are deep in stage 5. The only question is whether we'll recognize it before stage 6 begins. Look around. The signs are everywhere. Rising prices, soaring debt, endless wars, leaders doubling down on the same failing strategies. The empire isn't collapsing tomorrow, but the process has already started. Your children will read about this era in their history books and wonder, how did no one see it coming? But some people do see it. Some people understand the cycle. Some are preparing for what comes next. So I'll ask you, where do you think we are? Stage 4? Stage 5? Or are we already past the point of no return? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this changed how you see history, subscribe. We dive into the hidden patterns of money, power, and empire every week.